This is CTV News Channel. I'm Matt Scooby. Another escalation in the trade dispute between China and Canada today. This morning, China announcing a preliminary anti-dumping duty on Canadian canola imports.
China has announced a preliminary duty on Canadian canola imports. The provisional rate of 75.8% will come into effect on Thursday.
The sudden collapse of a dependable market can turn prosperity into crisis overnight. When a single country wields the power to decide the fate of an entire harvest, livelihoods tremble on the edge. That is the reality confronting Canadian farmers today. For them, the shock is a test of resilience, strategy, and survival. What unfolds now is not a simple trade dispute, but a pivotal moment in the future of Canadian agriculture. Is this the moment Canadian agriculture falters, or the turning point where a crisis transforms into an unexpected victory? So, how has Canada responded? Let's break it down. Canola is not an ordinary crop. For Canada, it represents more than fields of yellow flowers stretching across the prairies. It is an economic cornerstone, bringing in nearly $12 billion annually and sustaining the daily lives of thousands of farming families. Rural communities thrive on its success. While national trade statistics reflect its global weight, to outside observers, canola may appear to be one crop among many. But in truth, it is an engine of influence, giving Canada leverage in agricultural markets worldwide. That is why a disruption in exports strikes so sharply. The numbers do not only measure revenue, they measure trust, stability, and the nation's place in a global system of supply and demand. When China announced a temporary anti-dumping tariff of nearly 76% on Canadian canola, the blow was immediate and severe. It targeted one of Canada's most valuable exports, undermining billions in trade and striking at the core of farming communities. At first glance, it looked like pure punishment, a direct attempt to a key sector of the Canadian economy. Yet, beneath the surface, it is part of something larger than the crop itself. This is a maneuver shaped by politics as much as economics, and its timing reveals the deeper story. The backdrop lies in Canada's decision last year to slap 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. That move aligned Ottawa with Western allies determined to counter Beijing's growing influence in global trade. China's response, framed as an anti-dumping measure against canola, is more than technical policy. It is a calculated signal. Beijing claims Canadian subsidies distort markets and drive down prices, hurting its domestic farmers. Canada argues the opposite, insisting its programs are standard tools used to stabilize production, not schemes to flood foreign markets with cheap goods. The debate may sound technical, but at its heart, it is about power, influence, and leverage in a tense economic rivalry. The numbers reveal the weight of this clash. In 2024, China imported nearly $5 billion Canadian worth of canola, making it Canada's second-largest buyer. The sudden imposition of tariffs has depressed prices worldwide, cutting into farm revenues and forcing processors to scramble for new buyers. For farmers, the timing could not be worse, with harvest cycles already locked in and contracts disrupted. Yet, even as the blow lands hard, Canada's response illustrates why its agricultural system has long been admired for its resilience. The country has built a network designed to absorb shocks, drawing on infrastructure, logistics, and decades of navigating difficult trade environments. New markets in Asia, Europe, and even within North America can cushion the loss. While investment in higher-value canola products offers another path forward, the disruption is painful, but it is also a chance to diversify, innovate, and reinforce Canada's role in global food security. China, meanwhile, is not insulated from the consequences of its move. By raising the cost of Canadian imports, Beijing exposes its own consumers and processors to higher domestic prices. In industries that rely heavily on canola oil and animal feed derived from the crop, costs rise quickly. While officials may present the tariff as a protective measure, it carries risks of inefficiency, bottlenecks, and inflation within its own borders. These ripple effects highlight the fragility of using blunt trade barriers in a deeply interconnected global market. As the tariff looms, Ottawa is under pressure to respond. Agriculture Minister Heath MacDonald and International Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu have scheduled urgent meetings with the Canola Council of Canada and the Canadian Canola Growers Association. Their talks aim to chart a course before the duties take effect. The industry warns that a 76% tariff is not simply restrictive. It effectively closes the door to what had been a $5 billion market. The political debate within Canada is already heating up. Conservative Member of Parliament Michelle Rempel-Garner stood before reporters in Ottawa condemning the tariffs as a devastating blow to Western Canada's economy. She argued that the crisis could have been avoided and demanded immediate action from the federal government. Her criticism reflected a growing sense of frustration across farming regions where communities depend on canola as the backbone of local prosperity. The absence of a high-profile federal response only added to the unease. China's probe into Canadian canola began nearly a year earlier in direct reaction to Canada's tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. That link underscores the broader context. This conflict is not isolated to fields of canola in Saskatchewan or Alberta. It is bound up in the shifting architecture of global trade where agriculture, technology, and politics collide. The accusation of dumping, flooding another nation's market with goods at artificially low prices, cuts to the heart of trade fairness. Canada rejects the charge, insisting its policies are transparent and consistent with international standards. The outcome of this dispute, however, will be measured not in legal definitions, but in the survival strategies forged by Canadian farmers. The question is no longer whether the industry can withstand the shock, but how it adapts. Short-term pain may be unavoidable, but Canada's long-term trajectory will be defined by choices made now. By leaning on its reputation for high-quality production, forging new trade partnerships, and moving up the value chain through processing and innovation, Canada can shift the narrative from vulnerability to strength. Rather than seeing this as the collapse of a market, it may be remembered as the moment when Canada recalibrated its agricultural strategy for a new global order. The fields of canola stretching across the prairie provinces tell a story that reaches far beyond local communities. They reveal the interconnectedness of a world where a single policy decision in Beijing can change the price of food on shelves thousands of miles away. Yet, they also reveal something about Canada itself, a country with the foresight to prepare for uncertainty and the adaptability to survive when the rules of trade shift overnight. Canada's response to the crisis will echo for years. If it pivots successfully, its canola sector may emerge stronger, more diversified, and better positioned than before. If not, the costs will weigh heavily on rural communities and ripple through the broader economy. Either way, the world is watching, for this is more than a fight over oilseeds. Short-term tariffs cannot define Canada's canola sector. What determines its future is how the nation adapts, diversifies, and builds strength in a constantly shifting global marketplace. In this respect, Canada has proven again that foresight and resilience can outweigh immediate disruption. The country's reaction to China's sudden anti-dumping tariff on canola set at 75.8% became a powerful display of strategy and action. Farmers feared collapse, exporters braced for losses, and policymakers faced one of the most serious trade blows to agriculture in recent years. Yet, instead of succumbing to crisis, Canada moved with purpose, showing the value of preparation, coordination, and decisive government support. The Canadian government acted quickly, putting in place programs designed to shield producers from the sharpest financial pain. Price insurance and reserve funds were rolled out to stabilize incomes and guarantee that farms would not falter under the pressure of lost sales. By doing so, Ottawa reassured communities across the prairies that they would not be left to face the challenge alone. The Minister of Agriculture underscored this commitment by declaring that protecting farmers was the priority and that the measures were aimed at ensuring production would continue without disruption. This message of stability and support prevented the crisis from spreading into a deeper structural threat while giving farmers confidence to keep moving forward. At the same time, the private sector displayed its own form of adaptability. Farmer organizations, exporters, and industry associations immediately turned their attention to new markets. What could have been seen as a devastating loss of access to China became an opportunity to expand trade relationships elsewhere. Within a single quarter, exports to the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia grew by 20 to 30%. The Canadian Canola Association highlighted these numbers as evidence of how quickly the industry could shift its focus. This success showed that Canadian agriculture does not wait for markets to reopen, but seeks new ones with determination, ensuring that no single country holds overwhelming influence over its future. This pivot carried a lesson that reached far beyond numbers. It revealed that Canadian farming is not confined to reacting passively to external shocks, but instead acts with a clear strategy rooted in market intelligence and international connections. That approach reduces the risks of dependency on one major buyer and positions Canada as a supplier with both stability and flexibility. Equally important was the recognition that long-term survival cannot rely on volume alone. Canada invested heavily in processing technologies that added new dimensions to the value of canola. Instead of exporting raw seed in bulk, the sector advanced into refined vegetable oils, bio-based ingredients, and clean energy applications. An industry executive described this shift as central to future growth, emphasizing that higher-value products increase competitiveness and allow Canadian exports to command stronger positions in global markets. By upgrading output into products with broader applications and higher profit margins, Canada transformed canola from a commodity into a suite of strategic goods. This evolution was not merely about generating short-term revenue, but about reshaping bargaining power. Countries that depend solely on bulk commodity exports often find themselves vulnerable to price swings and protectionist policies. Canada's turn toward processing and innovation mirrors successful strategies in other advanced economies where agriculture has been elevated from raw production into high-value industries integrated with technology, energy, and food systems. The result is a sector capable of withstanding volatility while influencing trade negotiations from a stronger footing. Economic analysts point out that this diversification of both markets and products reflects a sophisticated understanding of modern trade. Over-reliance on a single market creates instability when policies shift or tariffs appear. Yet spreading exports across multiple destinations reduces that risk dramatically. With trade now growing in Europe, Asia, and other regions, Canadian producers have built a more balanced portfolio that can absorb shocks from one region without collapsing as a whole. Price fluctuations in a single market carry less weight and Canadian negotiators gain leverage, knowing their exports are sought in many parts of the world. The deliberate push into processing also reshapes Canada's agricultural identity. Canola is no longer only an oilseed grown on the prairies. It is a resource for advanced food production, renewable energy, and global supply chains. By linking farming with innovation, Canada places itself among countries that treat agriculture not as a vulnerable sector in need of protection, but as a strategic engine of growth, technology, and influence. These changes speak to a deeper strength often overlooked in global trade discussions. The real advantage does not lie only in the scale of exports, but in the ability to pivot quickly, seize opportunities, and transform challenges into leverage. Canada demonstrated this capacity at a moment of great uncertainty, turning what could have been a crushing blow into a chance to secure long-term resilience. Analysts note that this adaptability sets a benchmark for mid-sized economies navigating an unpredictable world of tariffs, protectionism, and shifting alliances. Canada's power lies in its ability to adapt. And this moment has proven it with clarity. By diversifying markets and elevating the value of what it sells, the country has transformed its agricultural sector from one vulnerable to political shifts into one capable of weathering storms and using them to grow stronger. The canola industry, once considered a traditional pillar of farming, now stands as an example of how to build a globally integrated, innovative, and resilient strategy for the future. The immediate crisis may have been triggered by a tariff, but the real story is about resilience. The volatility of global trade can close a market in an instant. Yet, those who are prepared, flexible, and forward-looking can turn that volatility into momentum. Canadian farmers are proving that adaptability, innovation, and strategy are far more decisive than any single policy imposed by another country. This transformation of Canada's canola industry is not temporary. It represents a long-term shift toward greater stability, competitiveness, and